Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon Zahand, and I want to welcome you to our panel today, Accessibility from Sideline to Full-Time. We have some great panelists here today to talk to you a little bit about how they made their passion a full-time gig. And with that, let's get right into it. David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, with pleasure. Hi, I'm David Tisrand. I'm the Senior Manager of the Ubisoft Accessibility team.
Hi, and I'm Emiliane Chiasson, and I'm the accessibility lead for Square Enix West, and I'm based out of IDOS Montreal.
I'm Karen Stevens. I'm the accessibility lead for EA Sports, and I'm based out of Orlando, Florida.
And again, I'm Brandon Zahand. I'm a senior program manager in gaming accessibility at Microsoft. And to kick things off, to just kind of, get the thoughts flowing, I'd love to know how you all got interested in accessibility. Everyone's always got such a unique and different story. Like, how did it become important to you? And why don't we start with Karen first?
Well, I'm deaf, so I'm using the captions to follow along on this, and accessibility has always been really, really important to me. I've been involved in it previous to EA. I was involved in it at Microsoft. I was the tech lead for all the games that came with Windows, and those games are accessible too. So it's just been, I've always been a passion of mine.
Awesome. Emiliane.
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of like, a lot of little things that happened both in my personal and professional life that led me to become more and more interested and involved in a very gradual way throughout the years, and it all came to a more culminating point, during my user research years where I was more and more exposed to player feedback and actually, being more focused and interested into user experience, and getting more exposed to what players were saying and stuff. And I think that's when I really started to like realize like, oh, we can actually like have an impact within the gaming, video gaming field, which wasn't necessarily something that I had thought of before.
Nice. And David?
For me, the very first time I professionally thought about game accessibility was when I was working at PlayStation, and it was something like 10 or 12 years ago when Ian Hamilton approached me and talked to me about game accessibility and asked me, how we could improve the accessibility of our games at the time. Unfortunately, at that time, I wasn't in a position to make it happen for multiple reasons, but it sticks with me really. And Ian and I kept in touch over the years until he finally got what he wanted, right? He transformed a user researcher into an accessibility champion.
That's fantastic. And shout out to Ian Hamilton for he's had his fingers somehow in every way, shape, or form into everyone's journey. Somehow it seems everyone always brings him up at some point. Yeah, for me, I wish it was something as noble. I was just looking for an easy humanities credit in college, and someone said, "Oh, sign language. That's a simple, easy class, no problem." And it wasn't. It was really hard, and I didn't do very well, but I loved it. I met some great friends in the deaf community. I got my first TTY, which I still have in the closet. And yeah, like all of a sudden, I was being introduced to accessible technology and the need for it. But, just having an interest, that's not really enough, right? There's obviously these moments where you decide to go from, oh, kind of on the sidelines, passerby, kind of watching it happen, and then actually getting involved, right? So I'd be really curious to kind of hear how you all kind of took that next step to become a champion, to become somebody who is really advocating for accessibility within your companies. David?
Yes, so in my previous life as a user researcher, I was always, in and out of development teams, but very quickly, often for a matter of weeks or months maximum. And it didn't leave me a lot of time or opportunities, to infuse huge changes. But in 2015, I had the opportunity to spend 2 years on Assassin's Creed Origins. So this is when I started talking about accessibility around me, and I made friends in the UI team, the localization team, and just started talking about, hey, can we increase the size of the subtitles? Can we add a background? Can we add speaker names? Just simple things like that. And all the things that Ian and other advocates had been saying for years. And it worked to an extent, right? We didn't manage to do everything we wanted, but the community really praised the quality of the subtitles at the time. And that's when I realized I was becoming an accessibility champion.
Yeah, I think for me, it was this moment when as you know, it's funny, I always knew about accessibility and thought about it from a deaf perspective. And when I was in Windows and in Office, but it never even occurred to me until I got into gaming, like that gaming, and even for a few years into gaming, like 4 years into my gaming experience, I didn't even occur to me about game accessibility. And it wasn't really until I worked with a kiddo at Seattle Children's who was not impressed by the fact that I worked at Xbox because, and I quote, "You don't make games I can play," right? She told that to me, and that's why she didn't like video games. And I didn't even occur to me, right, that the video games were something that needed to be accessible. And that was kind of a humbling start to my journey. Emilian, what about you?
Yeah, so it's a bit like similar to what David was talking about. It's kind of like these things where you start to do little things, within your role, and you start, networking with other people who are interested in accessibility as well within the company, and then you start like talking together and doing like different presentations and events, and starting connecting more and more with the community, who are sharing, the different, barriers and feedback, that they want to share with the teams and stuff. And so, getting more and more involved in that way as well. And a bit similar to you as well, I had a bit of a realization when I dated someone, who actually, we were talking about video games and stuff and like what I was doing and user research and whatnot. And he also said the same thing. He was like, I would love to play video games, but I can't, because he has reduced mobility. And for him, it was just a matter of like, I love to watch my friends play, but I don't think I can, and but he like accepted that. And I was like, that's unfortunate. I was like, it could be fun, to play together, and stuff. And so it was kind of like, one of those things, that kind of like just stayed in my head, also. And I was like, like what impact could I have in my industry, and kind of like started like that, and little things by little things, you start to do more and more and more and more until you're like, okay, like I'm doing a lot now. I'm stretched thin, so it was kind of like that as well.
Again, it just, I love how we all have different stories, but there do tend to be some similarities here or there and some of those crossovers. That's really fascinating. Now, Karen, I'm interested in your response because, as you mentioned, you're deaf. And so was game accessibility always something you were like, yes, I know it's a need, and yes, we have to go tackle it?
Pretty much. I mean, my first game accessibility experience was the games that shipped with Windows 7 and working with like Minesweeper and Solitaire and stuff, because they have to be, you can be blind and deaf, but you can still play those games. So like, I'm aware of accessibility. I've always sort of been aware, and I'm always interested in that sort of thing. Before that, I was in the medical industry, and that itself is super accessible. So I've always been interested in that. For me, with my current role though, I was a rendering developer and manager. I'm sorry, my brain is not quite working at this point. I'm Madden, and there was a game jam in 2014, and I got this idea from a friend who I had a conversation with, and he's really into NFL and Raiders, and I'm like, are you looking forward to the next version of Madden? And he's like, I can't play it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, why can't you play it? Well, he has a vision, and he couldn't see the pass icons or a lot of things on the screen, especially since the industry moved to 1080p. He couldn't see much of anything after that switch. So I'm like, well, I can't promise anything, but in terms of fixing it, but I will promise that if I ever have an opportunity to bring it up and push it, I definitely will. And in 2014, there was a game jam, and I won first place for Madden accessibility features, in which I pitched things like enlarge, brightness, contrast, colorblind support, stuff like that. And since it won first place, I was allowed to implement it. And since I was a developer, I actually implemented the whole thing myself, which definitely made it sure it got in the game. And
in the way you wanted to, right?
It was like, it's amazing how fast it is when you are the product owner, the designer, the developer, and everything all in one person. The meetings are super fast. Anyway, so yeah, we got that in, and then I went to the gameplay, the person who ran the gameplay team, and asked, so how do you usually get feedback? And he's like, we use a Twitter account. Oh, okay, so I should make a Twitter account. That's where EA Accessible came from. And I asked, so I did that so I could get feedback specifically on the feature set formatting. And then people ask, can I send you other stuff too? Sure, why not? Send me anything you have on any game. I'll take the feedback. And then that's what started me out on creating a network of people and stuff to get information as to how our games need to improve. And also, as people ask me questions about, okay, you gave me this information, what should I do with it? I made another internal website for how to fix things. So, and that's how it started. Wow.
Well, why don't we then just keep going? So you had all this great momentum and things were going great, but you were still an advocate, right? It wasn't your full-time gig. What was the breaking point? What was the thing that kind of flipped the switch and made that happen?
So management allowed me to spend some of my time working on games outside of Madden, in terms of getting accessibility sorted out. And they let that trickle over time to sort of seeing where it would naturally, sorry, my camera's doing interesting things, to see where it would naturally go. And so eventually accessibility, by my last version of Madden I was on, I was doing more accessibility than Madden. I was barely doing any Madden, and they allowed me to do that. And then afterwards, they're like, we have got a whole bunch of certification requirements coming up for communication and things. Why don't you make this your full-time job? So that was sort of, I didn't have to do a pitch. They actually more like pitched it to me. Granted, I was already moving it in that direction, and I had ongoing things in management, and it was sports that funded it, which is why I'm the sports accessibility lead. And so I lead all the sports teams through requirements and everything all the way through. And most of my advancements you'll never know about, because the things that we changed before they were ever made to make it as smooth as possible. And that's actually good. That's the way it should be. Fancy features are good too, but just making sure everything's inherently as accessible as possible is also super important.
Yeah, accessibility folks tend to be unsung heroes, right? If we do our jobs right, the thing should just work. There should be no issues. It's when there's issues that's when we usually hear about it. But David, I'm curious about you. Did your company just say, "Hey, David, you want to be an accessibility, a program manager or a producer or lead"? How did that happen?
Well, it didn't happen as suddenly. It took something along the lines of 2 years. So to try to condense it in the shortest way possible, it all started when I was at the end of my contract with Assassin's Creed Origins. It was around 2017, and the corporate social responsibility team, or CSR for short, wanted to push for our games to become more accessible, from HQ level. Some of you may even remember a survey that they sent out on social media asking for features, players wanted the most. So when I saw that survey on social media, I wasn't aware of the initiative. I got in touch with them, and then I realized that they were already collaborating with the QC team, who was responsible at the time to ensure that the games didn't cause epileptic seizures. And that's the team, by the way, that became the official QC accessibility team a few years later. So the idea was, for HQ to give overall goals for accessibility and for QC to evaluate it at the end, right? So having experience with production teams, I realized that this would probably not be enough, to profoundly change the way, developers were thinking about accessibility and implementing it. So as soon as I was done with Origins, I asked my boss to give me a white card, basically, for a year, to let me try something. And due to my seniority in user research, I had done like 10, 15 years of user research before, he trusted me, and he let me focus on accessibility for a year. That was the deal. So I did two things. The first one is I teamed up with corporate social responsibility and QC, and we toured the company, with presentation about why accessibility matters, what are the company objectives, what are the best practices, these kind of things. And the second thing I did was I took the programmer, some designers and a producer friends from from Origins, and we toured the studios with our story, exactly, how we tried to make Origins more accessible, what worked well, and more importantly, where we failed, what we could have done better now that we knew, and what we could do better next time. So the trick with the second presentation here was really bringing like-minded people to talk to like-minded people. So, designers could talk to the designers we were meeting, asking questions, producers could ask questions about, cost and resources, etc. And they had like-minded people to answer in the same meeting. So at this point, we're in 2018, and we've got clear objectives from the CSR team. We've got lots of dev teams interested by our accessibility story, and they want to reproduce that on their own title. And we've got the QC team ready to evaluate that at the end of the process. But we've got more than like 55 studios and 18,000 employees around the world. So there was no way a single person could support them on their day-to-day. But they needed detailed support, right? The tailor-made support. It's one thing to know how to implement subtitles, but it's another thing to know how to implement them well. So I took this project to the next level. I started contacting all the support teams, engine, middleware, editorial, user research labs, customer support, basically all the services teams that support the dev teams. And the aim was to try to make it easier for dev teams to implement accessibility, trying to find effective ways to support them from everywhere in the company. So, for example, the middleware team, started creating APIs, for things like text-to-speech and speech-to-text, which benefited a lot of other titles. But that's only game, right? And coming from user research, I had more ambitious goals for the full end-to-end user experience, from the first time players start hearing about our games up to the last time, they get in touch with us. So I wanted like everything to be accessible. So I started collaborating with other teams like the event team. I went to E3, looked at the accessibility of our booth, provided feedback, collaborated with the PR and marketing team as well, in order to, publicize what we are doing, make sure players were aware of our efforts and what was in our games, etc., etc. So I got in touch with everyone, applied the same process, evangelize, present the challenge, but more importantly, offer solutions, tailored solutions for all of these teams. All of these teams are part of the cogs that moves and make things accessible, and all of them need tailored support. And at that point, my boss looked at me and realized that there was no turning back, right? So we both went to CHR and we said, look, this is a new job, first time at Ubisoft, let's call it accessibility project manager, and make it happen. So that's it. That became a full-time gig. Now, in order to create the team, it took a little bit longer because obviously, having one person to change the DNA of a whole company, right, was way too much work. So, our team was great. Everyone was supportive, but, I definitely needed help. And also I needed to not be only at the user research lab of Montreal, which is dedicated to testing Montreal games, but I needed a transversal team, across the company to make sure that I had the reach we needed for the accessibility team. I'll be honest, I had no idea how to do that. So I went to CSUN and I met awesome people like Evelyn Thomas from Microsoft, well, Gareth Ford-Williams from the BBC. I listened to talks from Jenison Ascension from LinkedIn, etc., etc. So I left CSUN with a plan, and that plan was to talk to my CEO. Long story short, we can keep it for the social later, but a few months later, I was talking to Yves Guillemot and, about what I did under the radar, without budget, without a clear mandate, and, how we needed support and we needed a team. And he just said yes, and this is where we are now. We've got a team, we recruited Cherry Thompson, and this is just the beginning.
That's incredible. Here's to the leadership who are open-minded and willing to take chances and invest and give you those opportunities. I mean, what a great program to be able to go and spend a year, exploring this space. I mean, that's cool. I love that kind of hack mindset. Not just when it comes to projects, but to careers and jobs. I mean, that's awesome. Emilian, was your experience similar? Did you have to go pitch to any executives?
Yeah, so it was in a similar manner, I would say, but I would say that the biggest thing for me that I need to mention is that because of the very hard work that people before me did, within their own companies and their own, studios and communities and stuff, my journey to actually pitching the idea for a full-time role and department and to actually, have an impactful, conversation about accessibility is because there was a lot of people before me who, did these things within their own, organization. So I was able to actually, have, examples, and not just start from like, hey, like this is important, and then not really having a lot of, to back up, my arguments, let's say, but also, starting to be more and more involved, with the community online, gathering feedback, and ensuring that like, we were, showing, our teams, the impact, that accessibility or lack thereof, can do, to the player experience. And so for me, it was kind of like this gradual thing where I started to, like I was saying earlier, have more and more, responsibilities that were accessibility related. And eventually what they did is that, they hired someone on the user research team as I was getting more and more, responsibilities that was accessibility related. And slowly but surely, basically, as that person was getting, trained to do the user research team and stuff, and, they started to gain more and more responsibilities to eventually replace me in my role and me being able to jump into the full-time role of accessibility. But we did have to work, with people in leadership teams, to kind of like help me, build a bit of a pitch, to talk about, this initiative and talk about it at a high level too, because it's not just about the games like, David was talking about, but it's also about the actual company mindset and the DNA, of the company to, like, we can't just, go at it like as these like individual, game related things. We also need to think about it in a wider sense, for the whole, company. Like, how do we think accessibility, through the culture, of the company, because that's how we'll have the most impact, and that's how we're going to normalize it, at a bigger scale in the industry, later on. So basically, I was lucky to have a lot of support, because I think I was lucky to be in a position where there was a lot of people who did a lot of hard work before me. So I was able to actually, use that background, and those examples to say like, hey, like this is something that's really important in the industry, and that's, we can't just like not do anything about it, because we want to make sure that we're in it with the rest of the industry, because we would be lying to ourselves to not, talk about the fact that like, hey, like accessibility is something that's getting more traction, and I'd like to carefully assume that it's not a trend, but it's actually something that's starting to be really, really, important, and it always was important. It's just that people were not necessarily super well informed, but I think now people are getting more and more informed and more sensitized. So I think that now it's going to be easier and easier to pitch those ideas and pitch those initiatives as time goes on, I'd like to assume.
Oh, I hope so. I really do, and it gives me so much hope hearing your stories, right? Because I think, I've been doing this for a little. I started working in Xbox in 2001. I really started working on accessibility though in 2005, and the culture was different in the industry, and just socially in general. I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I think just societally, where we weren't in the same place, thinking about people, from diverse backgrounds, right? And so I had a lot of really hard conversations back in the day with leaders who just wanted to see like how many extra units was going to sell and how much it was going to cost, and it was really hard, and it could be really demoralizing. And I would like to think, and I hope that there aren't companies like that left out there that are left out there. But what I will say is that if you are, to anyone who's listening, if you are somebody who's at a company or a place in the industry where you feel like you're just not getting the traction you need or want, or people aren't paying attention, just know that we've all experienced it in some way, shape, or form, right? And the good news is that the industry, to your point, Emilian, I do think it's going in the right direction. I don't think this is a fad. You know, for me, it took some leadership changes within our organization. It took a number of years of advocating. It took some projects like Microsoft Connect, which kind of forced the issue from an accessibility standpoint, because it raised some really good questions like, what happens if you're missing a limb, or if you're in a wheelchair? Can this device work for you? Like, it took a lot of things to really finally get people's mind shift to change to the point where they could even consider having a team that focuses on accessibility. Because I had pitched for a number of years to have a team and just could never get traction. An interesting story, when they did create a team, I wasn't on it. And it was this really bittersweet moment for me, because on one hand, I was super excited that, hey, we now have a gaming accessibility person. It was a team of one back in the day. But the fact that I wasn't that person, it really gutted me, because I'd been working so long and so hard. But over time, I started to realize why that person was chose, the skill sets they were looking for. And at that time, they were really looking for people with platform experience, shipping platform. It wasn't an area I had done a lot with. So I kind of started looking at those areas that seemed like they were most interested in terms of those skill sets. And I started adjusting my career trajectory to start learning a little more on the PM side and on the RM side, and, you know, worked a little more with user research, got over into a game studio to get that experience, so that when they did decide to grow the team, I was in a natural place to be able to you know, compete for that position. And now, you know, we're a team of 4 people. So, I mean, just to say that, you know, it can take a long time, right? It took me 12 years. So don't be discouraged if you're struggling, or if your leadership isn't quite bought off. Use the resources, because everyone's kind of alluded to the fact that we use the resources that each other has created. We use each other as sounding boards. This community is unlike any other. Use the resources. You know, that's one thing I could say to you. Talk to people, share ideas, get support from others. Now, speaking of support, it can be really hard, I think. We've all been there, where you're the one-person show trying to support accessibility across a studio, or across a platform, or across a service. How did you, kind of get more folks to kind of join your team, whether it was virtually or otherwise? And how did you basically rise to the challenge of providing all of that support, answering all those questions that were coming in? Why don't we start with David?
Yes, so I like to use the fisherman analogy. You know, when you go on the beach and you see those fishermen with like 10, 20 rods, you know, and they're trying to wait for the fish that catches it, right? So that's roughly what I did, right? I really went to talk to everyone. You know, I used my best convincing voice to try to convince people to work with me, and, put a lot of energy on that. But, I was just waiting after that to see where it sticked, which one would come first, and trying to support those. And, when things were going, because very quickly it became way too much, because lots of people were coming back and wanted support, then it was really a question of prioritizing on what I would call like high value investments, right? So, or for the company or for users, right? One or the other. So for users, for example, we prioritize very quickly the frequently asked questions, accessibility pages on the customer support, so we could inform players, a bit like following what Karen was doing at the time. Thank you for the tip. We also created customer support tickets, dedicated to accessibility. And for the teams, I think one of the biggest one was all the engine and middleware gain that we could put in order to support the dev teams efficiently, and making sure that my time was benefiting everyone in this process, So that's one thing. The second thing, and it's no secret, right? All the accessibility teams in the biggest companies are using a champion program. So once again, we've got a lot of people passionate about accessibility at Ubisoft, and in all the teams, services teams, dev teams, websites, everything you want. And the accessibility team is positioned as a hub, basically, where we've got the knowledge, but we try to spread it to the champions. We make ourselves available when they have questions, and when there are new information or new guidelines or new best practices, we try to spread it out to them as well. So they act as the accessibility representative on the dev team. So, those are two ways to try to support as many teams as possible with limited resources.
Yeah, I mean, we're using a hub and spoke model too. We have a champs group at Microsoft and Xbox, and there is no way I could do my job without them, right? Cannot stress that enough. Karen, does EA use a champs program?
I mean like a champion program? Yes. Yeah. We do have something like that where, especially in sports, we have a contact per team. So I could go through them to get things done more efficiently, so I don't have to hunt down, like, I can say that this is an issue in the game and bring it to this one person and they can find from there, because their game teams are huge. So yeah, Madden's hundreds of people, so trying to find the right person is not necessarily very easy. So that's what we do for there.
Other strategies though for providing that broader support, like, again, you have how many people on your team now?
I have 3. I currently have 3. So when we started doing this, it was just me, and I managed to work with legal, and because they were interested in a lot of this stuff, and they got funding from them to work on some of the ea.com/able website, and then I got more funding from sports to continue that work, and we have it expanded out to nearly every game that comes out. We are still having some pipeline issues of getting things out quickly enough, but we're working on it. So yeah, that's where all the documentation comes from. That contractor became full-time and is now helping an internal and external type of things. So she also is one of the people who helps gather the information together as answers so we can have other people reach out. We also have the concept of a virtual team. So I have a database that I use to gather up. Anytime anyone emails a request in, it gets sent out to this database. And so anybody can access this. We have some virtual team members that are technically in UXR, other teams, and they can pull things out of the database. They can also put things in the database. So we all just sort of share this one accessibility repository. And so our team then acts as if it's larger than it appears, just thanks to that, which really, really helps. So yeah, it's a bunch of strategies. It's a matter of prioritizing. There's no way to get to everything. And we work with other teams to try to educate them to help. So certification, if they're having problems, we might help certification, understand how to support the other teams better and things like that. Just any little bit helps.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I mean, seriously, again, relying on others and other teams that have expertise, fantastic. We've got a real tight relationship with our certification team. It also helps that I used to work over there back in the day. So I love to work with that team. They've been helping us a lot with different testing strategies. They're helping us with some of our web testing right now. So love using those existing resources. Emilian, are there other resources that you heavily rely on, because you are a team of one, right?
Yeah, I am one of those people who's a team of one currently. That being said, even though I'm the only one that's full-time on the mandate of accessibility, we do also have, like David and Karen and yourself has mentioned, we do have a network of accessibility, allies and champions, throughout the studios, I do want to give a quick shout out to the accessibility working group at Crystal Dynamics, and give a quick shout out to Maria Robinson, who's been working really hard at that mandate on her team as well. And there's a lot of people like that throughout the studios who are super passionate about this in all their respective roles. So we have a lot of different types of skill sets and different type of backgrounds who are bringing a lot to the table. So it would be a total lie to say that I'm this lone soldier in the company working on this, because we truly are a lot of people on this. It's just that I'm the only one doing it full-time currently. That being said, it definitely can be overwhelming because accessibility touches a lot of different aspects of video game making. It's not just the games, but as David said, it's from the first time someone hears about a game until they, don't think about that game anymore, right? So it's like that thing where, you know, it can touch, you know, marketing, you know, PR and community management, customer support, websites, you know, events, you know, so it touches on a lot of things, right? So you can become stretched thin really fast if you don't prioritize, you know, properly. And it's important to accept that, you know, you're gonna have to choose some battles, and you're gonna have to accept that, like, this is a journey, you know, and to not, you know, feel too beat up, you know, if you feel like you're losing some of those battles, because you have to understand that there's a bigger goal at stake. And I think that for anyone who's maybe watching this, I think that accessibility and activism in you know, things in general can become very time consuming and energy consuming. And I think that everybody can relate sometimes to that feeling of, you know, feeling overwhelmed, you know, because this is something you're so passionate about and you want everything and everyone to listen. And, you know, sometimes that's not always gonna be that way. And I think that the earlier you start to kind of like learn how to know yourself and know who you work with, and know the different languages that people talk as well, because not everybody is as well informed, not everybody's talking about the same things or has the same background. So I think that's a really important thing to know, is to, you know, manage your time well, manage your energy well, and also understand that all the teams are different. So, you know, sometimes you're gonna have to talk about different things. You know, if you're talking about, you know, budgeting or financing, you know, are conversations that are less, you know, fun maybe than others, but this is still something that you have to learn about and that you have to talk about. And, you know, talk to those people who can actually have an impact on the resources and, you know, financing of this initiative and this mandate. So I think that that could probably be maybe my advice. That being said, I'm still very early in this initiative. I started only full-time in January, and we had a lot of plans, you know, on visiting all of our different studios and doing this like accessibility tour kind of thing, you know, and meeting with all the different executives and teams and stuff. And then COVID happened. And so a lot of, you know, the energy was, you know, thrown into, you know, making all this remote working thing happen and everything. So it did change a lot of our strategies, right? And I think for some of it, it was in a good way, and some of it, you know, did put a bit of a wrench into some of our plans. But you know, we just have to adapt. And I think that's just something to realize, is that sometimes, you know, not everything is going to go as planned, you know, as you had it planned out and mapped out in your head, but you just have to adapt, and that's normal.
Absolutely. And, you know, COVID really did throw, I think, all of us for a loop. And so that actually leads really nicely, I think, into my next question, which is, all of this being considered, you know, everything that's going on, how do you spread awareness and some of that passion, you know, that enthusiasm for accessibility and inclusivity within your studios? How do you spread that around? Because you know, frankly, it's different. I used to rely a lot on just going up and knocking on people's doors and sitting down and having a conversation. And, you know, how's that changed for you? Karen, you want to start?
You mean how COVID has changed things for me, or how to raise
just
accessibility?
how you are spreading. Well, I know, trust me, COVID's changed everything for all of us in a lot of different ways, but specifically with spreading awareness through the company, your company now, and spreading some of that passion, enthusiasm. What are the strategies you're using now to spread awareness throughout EA?
So it pretty much the same strategies I was using all along. I work with certification, and they help spread the word when things aren't going quite right from that aspect. I work with legal. They give my team contact information to all teams. I work with the Accessibility Employee Resource Group, and that spreads information about my team too. And then we have the Twitter account, which lots of people are following, including people who are internal. And all that together is all multiple ways of spreading awareness. So that all helps. In terms of COVID, it actually didn't make much difference because my team was almost entirely Zoom based anyway. Oh. And most of us were at least partially working from home before all this happened. So it didn't really matter. In my building, we're overcrowded. So all of our meetings are Zoom, even if you're meeting with people in the same building, because there's no meeting rooms. So this really made very little difference.
Wow. So really different then. Yeah, I've had a very different experience. David, is it same for you? Do you tend to work more remotely, and do you have any strategies that work well for spreading that awareness and that passion remotely?
Yeah, as soon as I finished Assassin's Creed Origins, I started working with studios all around the world, right? So there was no choice but to find a solution that would work remotely, right? So things we're doing, just in a nutshell, to be short, is like adding accessibility as much as possible into our internal daily newsletter that every employee receives. So all about what we did, or about what the competition did, for example. We created knowledge sharing platforms, such as Teams or Slack, where people can ask questions to us, but also to each other. Sometimes devs help other devs, so it's a way to communicating there. And the accessibility team also populates it with things they see and find interesting. We invite speakers as well. Ian Hamilton did a talk in Montreal, Brandon Cole as well, Cap Game in France, etc. Recently, we started creating e-learning capsules as well, which are very important for freeing some time from the accessibility team to talk about the basics, right? What is accessibility? How do you develop good quality subtitles? These kind of things that just become just, on the shelf kind of a solution that people can go and take without needing our time. And as Karen was saying, every service we're talking to is a service that's going to take accessibility as part of its DNA, of its processes, and then they're going to talk to the teams they are collaborating to, and they're going to talk about accessibility too, and bring more knowledge there as well. So yeah, this is all coming together.
And,
yeah, it's kind of the same for us, where a lot has been mentioned already, but for us, I think it's kind of like that same thing where you want to have accessibility that's in the spotlight sometimes as like a focused thing. Like, for example, for us, we had this spring, we had the accessibility themed week. So we had a full week that was dedicated to the spreading of the awareness of accessibility, within the company. So we had multiple speakers, and we had a few workshops and stuff like that. And then we also, have in parallel, the efforts to try and get accessibility, as the expression would say, baked in and not caked on, So there's the normalizing of accessibility within the processes, and then there's also spreading the awareness in a more like flashy way as well, to kind of like get people to get their attention, as well. But I think that one of the most efficient way I found to really have an impact in terms of awareness is to, empower the voices of the community. I think there's not a lot that's more efficient, I find, to really have someone pay attention than to, show actual player feedback, and say like, hey, here's the barriers that I'm encountering, or here's what works for me, and really getting devs to look at it and say like, okay, so yeah, so I can really, connect this to an actual experience. Because sometimes, when we talk about games and features and stuff like that, it can become something that's really abstract for some people, and they don't necessarily look at it in the way that we wish they would. They could look at it as features or things, that are a checklist or something, which is not what accessibility is, and I think that it really adds more impact when we can say like, oh, here's the community, and here's what they have to say. And so, we'll invite speakers, and involve players also in play tests and user tests and stuff like that, different studies. And then also, I think that it's really important, again, to ensure that we have customer feedback forums, for different games, and customer support and stuff like that as well, so that those feedback can get sent in to the proper teams and stuff. And for us, accessibility is actually part of the production support team. So basically, we're under this umbrella. So I work, in tandem with, the QA teams and stuff like that, and different, production support teams, so that way, and we meet regularly. So that way, accessibility is always kind of like part of the conversation, at different department and different levels. So I think that's like how we spread awareness in different ways. In the company, but yeah, I mean, it's not anything that's super that's sorcery or anything magic, right? You just have to really, talk about it and not shut up about it, and you just have to make sure that you're not just giving feedback, but also providing solution, like David says, because it's one thing to say like, hey, this doesn't work, But then if you don't provide any solution or any kind of like, useful, criticism, then that's not really going to go anywhere except make that person feel bad. So,
Yeah, to jump in,
I think you nailed it on the head there, and I think it's a great place to close our conversation today. Is that accessibility isn't just about making a feature in a game; it's about making an entire experience accessible, all the way from the game itself to the websites, the social media tweets, that sort of thing. When we're thinking about teaching people about accessibility, it's more than just telling them there's something wrong. It's giving them tips and ideas on how to make it better, but it's also letting them understand why that being wrong has an impact, building empathy. And I will say that's one thing that I think COVID has afforded us in a positive way, is that the one area that I find works really the best for just getting people to understand is talking one-on-one or in a group with members from our gaming and disability community. So I would certainly encourage everyone here who's listening, if you haven't, reach out to the community, invite them in, get them on a Teams call or a Zoom call, get them face-to-face, talk, learn about why it's important to make products accessible, how to make those products accessible, and what resources are at their disposal to make those experiences as inclusive and delightful as possible. I want to thank everyone on our panel. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said to jump in one thing, feedback really, really, really does matter. Please send it in. That's how blind accessibility was added to Madden in the first place, for like the kick meter and things, is because I had like literally a couple dozen blind gamers email me all within one weekend, which made it super easy to push it through. Please send your feedback.
And I think you see, it's a fantastic call out, and you'll notice we're all nodding our heads, right? Everyone will tell you that your feedback's heard, it's sent to those teams, it's used to drive things. And even if you don't get a response, even if you don't get, you see that thing happen right away, know that we use all of it. So
I'm on Twitter way too much.
Weren't we all? Thank you, David, Emilion, Karen, for your time. It's so appreciated. Thank you to everyone who attended to watch us. And again, best of luck in your accessibility journey. Don't give up. And we look forward to seeing all the great things you're going to do. Take care, everyone.
Don't
Bye-bye.
hesitate to reach out.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.